A silent ring of giants stands guard on a windswept plain. These are the Neolithic standing stones, ancient puzzles set in the landscape by people who left no written records. Roughly 6,000 years ago, our ancestors made a profound shift. They stopped wandering as hunter-gatherers and began to settle, to farm, and to build. With simple stone tools and immense communal effort, they raised these colossal monuments, circles, and rows that have defied explanation for millennia. By the end of this journey, you will understand the most compelling theories behind humanity's first great stone mysteries. We will uncover how they were built without metal or wheels and why societies devoted generations to their construction. This is an exploration of the who, the how, and the ultimate why. What does a civilization choose to make permanent? This profound change in how people lived is known as the Neolithic Revolution. It was not a single event but a slow wave of transformation that swept across continents, beginning roughly 12,000 years ago and lasting for millennia. For the first time, humans stopped following herds and seasonal plants. They began to cultivate crops like wheat and barley and to domesticate animals like cattle and sheep. This shift from nomadic hunting and gathering to settled farming is the essential foundation for everything that followed, including the standing stones. With a stable food supply, populations could grow. People built permanent homes, forming villages and then larger communities. This new way of life created something unprecedented: surplus. For the first time, not every single person had to be directly involved in food production every single day. This surplus of food and time allowed for specialization. Some could become toolmakers, others potters, and some could perhaps become the planners and spiritual leaders of their community. Most importantly, it created a coordinated labor force. The construction of a stone circle was not the work of a lone family or a small band. It was a monumental community project requiring hundreds of people working together over years, even generations. They had to be fed, housed, and organized. The Neolithic Revolution provided that social glue, the shared identity and common purpose that could mobilize an entire society toward a single, breathtaking goal. The materials themselves tell a story of immense effort. While many stones were sourced locally, dragged from nearby hills or quarries, others came from astonishing distances. The famous blue stones at Stonehenge, for example, were transported over 150 miles from the Preseli Hills in Wales. Imagine moving multi-ton stones across rivers, through forests, and over rugged terrain without the wheel, without metal tools, using only ropes, wooden rollers, levers, and sheer human muscle. The scale of the labor is almost incomprehensible to us today. It represents thousands upon thousands of person-hours, a vast investment of a community's most precious resource, its people's time and energy. And this investment raises the central, haunting question with even greater force. Why, what belief, what need, what vision was so powerful that it compelled these early farmers to dedicate generations of their lives to raising these silent giants from the earth? The sheer variety of these monuments is as telling as their size. While the great stone circles capture our imagination, they are just one expression of a global Stone Age language. Scattered across the landscapes of ancient Europe and beyond are other, equally mysterious forms. In the misty fields of Carnac in Brittany, France, you do not find a circle, but something arguably more astonishing: thousands of individual standing stones arranged in long, parallel rows that stretch for miles across the countryside. Walking among these silent armies, you feel a sense of deliberate procession, of lines guiding movement toward some unseen focal point. Elsewhere, solitary giants known as menhirs stand alone, often marking a burial site, a territorial boundary, or a place of singular importance. Then there are the dolmens, which look like enormous stone tables. These were usually burial chambers with massive capstones balanced on upright supporters, creating a permanent house for the dead. And perhaps most architecturally sophisticated of all are the passage tombs like Ireland's Newgrange. This is not a simple pile of stones but a huge, man-made mound with a long, narrow passage leading to a central chamber, engineered so perfectly that on the winter solstice, a beam of sunlight pierces the darkness to illuminate the inner space for just a few precious minutes. This phenomenon was not confined to one corner of the world. From the windswept Orkney Islands north of Scotland to the sun-baked islands of the Mediterranean, from the Atlantic coast of Portugal to the plains of Turkey, and even in parts of Asia and Africa, our ancestors felt the same compelling need to shape the landscape with stone. The map of these sites is a map of early human ingenuity, a connected web of cultural expression that emerged independently across vast distances. The designs vary dramatically, from the geometric precision of a circle to the sprawling linearity of the Carnac rows, suggesting different communities had their own specific rituals, beliefs, and architectural traditions. A dolmen built for burial in Korea may look similar to one in Denmark, but the ceremonies that took place there were uniquely their own. Yet this incredible diversity points to a powerful, shared human impulse. Whether to honor ancestors, track the heavens, gather the community, or mark a sacred space, these early societies all chose to make their statement in the most permanent material they could master. They were writing their history, their beliefs, and their identity not on parchment but directly onto the earth itself. So if these monuments were the pages, what story were they trying to tell? Of all these ancient puzzles, one site stands as the undisputed crown jewel. Stonehenge, on the windswept Salisbury Plain in England, is more than a circle of stones. It is a layered story of a civilization's ambition, written in earth and rock over 1,500 years. Its construction did not happen in a single lifetime but unfolded in distinct chapters, each generation adding to the vision of the last. It began not with stone but with earth. Around 5,000 years ago, people dug a massive circular ditch and bank, creating what is known as a henge. Inside this sacred enclosure, they placed wooden posts and dug pits, perhaps for ceremonies or to mark the rising sun. This was the first draft of the monument. Centuries later, the vision transformed from wood to stone. The first stones to arrive were the distinctive blue stones, transported from the Preseli Hills in Wales, a staggering journey of over 150 miles. How they moved these 4-ton stones remains one of archaeology's great debates, whether by sledges and rollers over land or on rafts along rivers and coastlines. The effort is almost unimaginable. Then, around 4,500 years ago, came the truly monumental phase. Giant sarsen stones, some weighing over 25 tons, were brought from the Marlborough Downs about 20 miles to the north. These were the stones that would form the iconic outer circle and inner horseshoe we recognize today. The engineering here moves from brute force to breathtaking precision. The builders did not just stack these stones, they joined them. On top of the upright sarsens, they placed horizontal lintel stones. To lock these lintels securely in place, they employed a technique more familiar in woodworking, the mortise and tenon joint. They carved a protruding bump, a tenon, on the top of each upright. On the underside of each lintel, they carved a matching hollow, a mortise. The lintel was then lowered perfectly onto the upright, the joint locking the two stones together as if they were pieces of a colossal stone puzzle. This was architecture with permanence in mind. And then there is the alignment, the feature that has cemented Stonehenge's fame as an ancient observatory. If you stand in the center of the circle and look through the entrance, your gaze is directed toward the northeast. On the morning of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, the sun rises directly over the heel stone, a solitary sarsen placed just outside the circle. This alignment is too precise to be coincidence. It tells us the builders possessed a deep, accumulated knowledge of the sun's yearly cycle. They could predict this pivotal moment when light triumphed over darkness, and they built a permanent, unshakable calendar to mark it. Stonehenge, therefore, becomes the archetype. It embodies the immense logistical effort, the sophisticated engineering, and the profound celestial purpose that define the greatest Neolithic monuments. It was a cathedral for a society that worshipped the sky, a machine made of stone for understanding time itself. Yet for all its grandeur, Stonehenge was not alone in its connection to the heavens. While the towering sarsens demonstrate engineering genius, the smaller bluestones hold a deeper, more intimate secret. Their journey is the heart of Stonehenge's enduring mystery. Each of these distinctive spotted dolerite and volcanic bluestones, weighing up to 4 tons, originated in the Preseli Hills of West Wales, a grueling 150-mile journey across mountains, rivers, and forests. The how of their transport has sparked a century of fierce academic debate. The traditional view is one of epic human endeavor, that Neolithic people quarried the stones, then hauled them on wooden sledges and rollers, perhaps even floating them partway on rafts along rivers and coastal waters. This theory paints a picture of generations united in a sacred pilgrimage, moving their mountains inch by painful inch. The opposing theory argues for nature's hand, suggesting these stones were carried to the Salisbury Plain by glaciers during the last ice age, deposited as erratic boulders that the builders later found and used. Yet recent geological fingerprinting has traced specific stones to very specific quarries in the Preseli Hills, quarries that show clear evidence of human tool marks and extraction activity. This strongly supports the idea of deliberate human choice and removal. So if they moved them and we know from where, the next question becomes even more compelling: why these stones? Why go to such impossible trouble for this particular rock? The answers point to motivations beyond mere architecture. For the people building Stonehenge, the Preseli Hills may have been a sacred landscape, an ancestral homeland. Bringing stones from that revered place to their new ceremonial center could have been a way of physically connecting the two, weaving the power of their origins into their new monument. Other theories suggest the blue stones were believed to have healing properties. Ancient folklore and even some medieval texts refer to the stones having curative powers, and the area around Preseli is dotted with holy wells, hinting at a long tradition of associating the region with wellness and magic. Perhaps most intriguing is a modern discovery. When struck, many of these bluestones produce a clear, resonant metallic ring, unlike the dull thud of other local stones. Could these stones have been chosen for their sound, used in rituals to create echoes, chimes, or rhythms that connected the physical world to the spiritual? The bluestone enigma forces us to look past construction and into cosmology. This was not a random selection of convenient rock. It was a deliberate, generations-long mission to bring pieces of a distant, magical landscape to the heart of their world. The stones themselves were not just building blocks, they were sacred relics. But Stonehenge, for all its fame, is not the largest of these ancient complexes. Just 20 miles to the north lies a monument of such staggering scale that it makes its celebrated neighbor seem almost intimate by comparison. This is Salisbury. Here, the builders did not construct a single, precise circle. They created an entire ritual landscape, a colossal circular ditch and bank, so massive you could lose a modern house within its depths, encloses a space so vast it contains a good portion of a modern village. Within this great henge, they erected not one but 2 smaller stone circles. Walking among Salisbury's sarsens is a profoundly different experience. Unlike the trimmed and shaped pillars of Stonehenge, these stones are raw and irregular, giants frozen in mid-movement. Their surfaces are textured and pitted by millennia of weather, and their placement feels more organic, as if they grew from the earth themselves. You do not just observe this monument, you move through it, dwarfed by its scale, feeling the history not as a distant spectacle but as a tangible presence surrounding you. Yet Salisbury was not an island. It was the beating heart of a much larger sacred geography. Leading away from its southern entrance is the West Kennet Avenue, parallel lines of standing stones that march across the landscape for over 1.5 miles. This stone-lined pathway was a processional route, a ceremonial highway connecting Avebury to another, very different kind of sacred site, a place known as the sanctuary. Today, the sanctuary is marked only by concrete posts, but archaeology reveals its fascinating evolution. It began as a complex of wooden posts, a temple made of great oaks. Later, this wooden structure was replaced by concentric circles of stone. This transformation from wood to stone is profound. It tells us these people were consciously building for eternity, replacing the organic and perishable with the mineral and permanent. The West Kennet Avenue physically linked the immense communal power of the Avebury henge with the more intimate, perhaps initiatory space of the sanctuary. This changes everything. We are no longer looking at isolated monuments, but at a coordinated, regionally significant ceremonial complex. The landscape itself was being sculpted into a stage for ritual, with different sites playing different roles in a grand, cyclical drama of life, death, and the seasons. A person might gather with thousands at Avebury for a major solstice celebration, then walk in solemn procession down the stone-lined avenue to perform more private rites at the sanctuary. This interconnectedness forces us to see these people not as primitive stone raisers, but as sophisticated landscape architects and spiritual philosophers. They were weaving their beliefs into the very fabric of the earth, creating a sacred map where every path, stone, and enclosure had meaning. If the stones were the pages, then these ritual landscapes were entire chapters in their story. So what story were they telling? The clues may not be in the stones themselves, but in the empty spaces between them and in the celestial patterns they so carefully observed. Far from the chalk plains of southern England, another stone masterpiece rises from a landscape of peat and wind. On the Isle of Lewis in Scotland's Outer Hebrides, the Carnac stones offer a design and purpose distinct from any we have seen. While Stonehenge feels like a contained, engineered machine, Carnac is an organic part of the wild terrain. It stands on a high ridge of ancient peat, a silent congregation of gneiss giants overlooking the dark waters of Loch Rogue. The shape is immediately arresting. At its heart is a near-perfect circle of tall, slender pillars, but from this circle, long arms of stone stretch out to the north, south, east, and west, forming a rough cruciform pattern reminiscent of a vast, petrified Celtic cross. A single, massive pillar over 15 feet tall stands sentinel at the center, like the axis of a silent stone clock. This unique architecture hints at a unique purpose. While Stonehenge is famously aligned to the sun, the builders of Carnac seem to have been obsessed with a more subtle and complex dance, that of the moon. The moon's path across our sky is not a simple, repeating loop. Over a cycle of approximately 18.6 years, the points on the horizon where it rises and sets slowly migrate north and south. Every 18.6 years, this migration reaches its extreme, an event astronomers call a major lunar standstill. At Carnac, the southern avenue of stones points directly toward a low notch in the distant hills. During a major standstill, the full moon, at its lowest and most southerly point in its long cycle, appears to roll along the crest of those hills, almost skimming the horizon before disappearing down the precise line of the stone avenue. It is a breathtaking alignment, one that requires generations of meticulous observation to even notice, let alone encode in stone. This lunar focus at Carnac opens a profound new window into the Neolithic mind. It suggests that different communities in different landscapes may have tuned their monuments to different celestial rhythms. One culture might have venerated the sun, marking its reliable, life-giving cycle of solstices. Another, perhaps in a place where the moon's light was crucial for navigation or tides, might have dedicated themselves to tracking its more complex, longer dance. The stones were not just calendars, they were libraries of astronomical knowledge, each site a volume specializing in a different chapter of the sky's eternal story. The precision at Carnac, calibrated to an 18.6-year cycle, speaks of a patient, long-term tradition of sky watching passed down through countless generations. What did they believe happened during that rare lunar event when the moon rolled into its stone pathway? Was it a time of powerful ritual, a moment when the boundary between the earthly and the celestial grew thin? But to truly grasp the scale of this ancient ambition, we must travel to the coast of Brittany in France. Here, the stones do not form circles or tombs, but something far more overwhelming. At Carnac, you are confronted not by a monument, but by an entire landscape transformed into geometry. Over 3,000 individual standing stones are arranged in long, parallel rows that march across the countryside for kilometers, like the bones of a colossal, petrified army. The sheer number is disorienting. You stand at the edge of a field and see lines of granite menhirs, some shoulder high, others towering overhead, receding into the distance until they blur into the horizon. It is a sight that defies simple explanation, an act of landscaping so vast it feels like the work of gods or giants. For centuries, local legend provided just such an origin story, claiming these were Roman legionnaires turned to stone by a Christian saint. It is a tale born from the sheer, uncanny order of the spectacle, an attempt to explain the inexplicable. The truth revealed by archaeology is even more remarkable. These stones were raised around 4,500 years before the Common Era, making them older than the earliest phases of Stonehenge by centuries. They are the work of a society that emerged from the very dawn of farming in Europe. So what possible purpose could such a staggering, linear arrangement serve? The theories are as grand as the site itself. One idea is that these were territorial markers on a titanic scale, declaring the power and domain of a wealthy, organized chiefdom. The rows could have served as symbolic boundaries, visible from miles away, saying this land is claimed, this land is ordered. Another compelling thought is that they were processional pathways. Walking between these silent granite lines creates a powerful feeling of being channeled, guided toward some sacred destination, perhaps a burial mound or a ceremonial enclosure now lost to time. The experience would have been profoundly different from gathering in a circle. It was a journey with a direction, a ritual of movement and progression. But the most tantalizing theory looks to the sky, just as at Carnac and Stonehenge. Some researchers have proposed that the alignments at Carnac are not random. Certain rows appear to point toward significant sunrise points on the horizon, particularly at the solstices. The scale here, however, is magnified to almost unimaginable proportions. If this was a calendar, it was not a device you consulted. It was one you walked through, a calendar you experienced with your entire body across a vast tract of land. The rows could have functioned as giant sightlines, with specific stones acting as foresights and backsights to frame the rising sun on pivotal days of the year. Imagine a community gathering at dawn on the summer solstice, watching the sun crest a distant hill precisely in line with a kilometer-long avenue of stones, illuminating the pathway in a blaze of golden light. At Carnac, the monument is the landscape itself, and the ritual was woven into the very act of moving through it. This shifts our understanding once more, from architecture to a kind of sacred geography so immense it becomes the territory of the gods. Behind every silent stone stands a community of people, flesh and blood, with hopes, beliefs, and calloused hands. To solve the mystery of the monuments, we must first meet the builders. Who were these Neolithic engineers who could envision such grandeur and muster the will to achieve it? The stones themselves give no names, but the earth around them whispers clues through the remnants of their lives. From nearby settlements like the sprawling village discovered near Durrington Walls, close to Stonehenge, we know these were not isolated bands of mystics. They lived in substantial timber houses in communities numbering in the hundreds or even thousands. Their trash heaps filled with animal bones tell a story of seasonal feasting on an epic scale, particularly of pork and beef. Analysis of the bones shows these animals were brought from all across Britain, some from hundreds of miles away. This points to something extraordinary: periodic, massive gatherings. These were likely not permanent, year-round cities, but seasonal capitals that swelled with people at specific times of the year, perhaps aligned with the solstices or other celestial events. Imagine families and clans traveling for days or weeks, bringing their finest livestock to a pre-arranged meeting ground. They came for trade, for marriage alliances, for ceremony, and for communal work. The construction of a stone circle was not drudgery imposed by a tyrant, but likely a sacred duty and a social spectacle. Raising a 20-ton sarsen would have required coordinated chants, the strain of hundreds of people on great ropes, the precise placement of timber levers, all watched by a gathered multitude. It was a ritual in itself, a powerful act of collective identity that turned physical labor into a binding religious experience. The tools they used reveal both ingenuity and immense effort. They had no metal, no wheels, no beasts of burden stronger than oxen. Their primary digging tools were picks fashioned from the sturdy antlers of red deer. Their axes were painstakingly polished from hard stone like flint or granite, hafted onto wooden handles. Ropes were made from plant fibers or strips of animal hide. With these simple technologies, they excavated enormous ditches, shaped multi-ton stones, and moved them across the landscape. The physical toll is etched into their own bones. Skeletal remains from this period show signs of severe osteoarthritis, particularly in the spine and knees, and traumatic injuries consistent with a life of relentless, heavy labor. Yet these same burials, especially in monumental tombs like West Kennet Long Barrow near Avebury, also show evidence of a stratified society. Some individuals were interred with fine pottery, ornate jewelry made of rare materials like jet and amber, and beautifully crafted stone axes that were far too delicate for practical use. These were symbols of power and status. This creates a compelling portrait. The Neolithic world was one of both deep community and emerging hierarchy. There were likely spiritual leaders or chiefs who could plan and direct these vast projects, and skilled artisans who specialized in tool making or astronomy. But the workforce was the entire society, united by a shared cosmology. The monument was the project that gave their gathering purpose, and the gathering was the engine that built the monument. Their diet, heavy on meat during these feasts but otherwise reliant on grains, sustained them for the work. Their health was sacrificed to their ambition. Their tools were extensions of their will. In the end, these standing stones are not just monuments to forgotten gods, but memorials to human cooperation, to the breathtaking things a society can achieve when it moves together toward a common celestial dream. Yet this dream was not solely one of light and life. The bones of the builders tell a story of immense physical strain, but the stones themselves are a testament to their ingenious minds. How did a society without metal, without the wheel, accomplish such feats of engineering? The process began not with brute force, but with careful observation and a deep understanding of the materials around them. To quarry a massive stone slab from a bedrock outcrop, they likely used a combination of fire and water. They would build a roaring fire directly against the stone face. Once the rock was searing hot, they would douse it with cold water. The sudden, extreme temperature change causes the rock to expand and contract violently, creating deep cracks and fissures. Into these fresh cracks, they would hammer wooden wedges. Then they would pour water over the dry wood. As the wedges absorbed the water, they would swell with tremendous force, acting like organic hydraulic jacks to slowly, inexorably pry the stone free from the earth. It was a slow, patient process, a conversation with the stone itself. Once a multi-ton monolith was successfully detached, the even greater challenge began: moving it. The most widely accepted theory involves a symphony of simple machines and coordinated human power. The stone would first be levered onto a robust wooden sledge, a platform of stout logs lashed together. This sledge would then be placed on a track of smoothed, greased wooden rails or on a path of constantly repositioned wooden rollers, like a fleet of giant moving pencils. Teams of people, perhaps numbering in the hundreds, would pull on ropes made of plaited plant fibers or leather. To reduce friction further, they might have poured water or animal fat on the track ahead of the sledge. The logistics are staggering. A route had to be cleared and leveled across miles of often difficult terrain. Food and shelter had to be provided for the work crews. The coordination required shouts, chants, and signals to keep everyone pulling in unison. This was not a silent, grim task. It was likely a rhythmic, communal event, a ritual of motion that transformed back-breaking labor into a shared, purposeful journey. The final act, raising the stone upright, was the most delicate and dangerous operation of all. Imagine the scene. The stone lies next to a prepared hole, its base positioned right at the lip. One method involves building a tall, sturdy frame of timber directly over the hole. Ropes from the top of the frame are attached to the top end of the prone stone. As teams pull down on the ropes, the stone's base acts as a pivot, and the giant slab begins to swing upward in a slow, controlled arc. Other workers would use long wooden levers to nudge and guide the stone's base into the pit as it rose. An alternative method uses an earthen ramp. The stone is dragged up a sloping ramp built next to the hole, with its base hanging over the edge. Then, by carefully pulling from the opposite side or levering from below, the builders would tip the stone forward until it slid down into its socket. The final, satisfying thud was only the beginning. To ensure the stone stood true for millennia, the hole was packed not with loose dirt, but with a carefully selected mix of smaller stones, rubble, and soil, rammed tight with heavy mauls. This stone packing created a flexible, durable foundation that could absorb ground movement without cracking the monolith. Each successful raising was a victory of physics, patience, and perfect teamwork. There were no blueprints, only knowledge passed down through generations, learned through trial and heartbreaking error. Every stone that stands today represents countless lessons learned from ones that fell. This profound understanding of the sky is what we now call archaeoastronomy. It is the study of how ancient cultures observed, recorded, and interpreted celestial events, and the standing stones are their most durable textbooks. At its core, this theory suggests these monuments were not just symbolic, they were functional, serving as colossal calendars and observatories built from the very bones of the earth. The most famous example is, of course, the summer solstice sunrise at Stonehenge, but consider the winter solstice at Newgrange in Ireland. This enormous passage tomb, older than the pyramids, is engineered with breathtaking precision. Above its entrance is a small, box-like opening called a roof box. For just a few minutes at dawn around the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, a narrow beam of sunlight travels up the 60-foot-long passageway and illuminates the central burial chamber deep inside the mound. In that moment of profound darkness, a shaft of light penetrates the realm of the ancestors. This was not a happy accident. It was deliberate, sacred architecture designed to capture the moment the sun began its return, promising the rebirth of spring. The alignment had to be perfect, planned over generations before a single stone was set. This speaks to a deep, practical need to track time, to know precisely when to plant, when to harvest, when to move herds. A society dependent on agriculture lives and dies by the seasons, and these stone calendars provided a fixed, unarguable point of reference in a world before written records. But the celestial knowledge encoded in these sites goes far beyond the simple solar year. The moon's cycles are more complex, and tracking them reveals an even more sophisticated astronomical mind. At the Callanish Stones in Scotland, the southern avenue points to the distant horizon where, once every 18.6 years, the moon reaches its extreme southern standstill and seems to roll along the hilltops. This is a long-term, generational observation. Similarly, the Thornborough Henges in northern England, often called the Stonehenge of the North, are three enormous aligned earthworks. Their orientation is not toward a solstice sunrise, but toward the midwinter rising of the star Capella, and also toward the southern lunar standstill. This suggests a regional tradition of lunar observation, a different chapter in the same celestial story. So were they precise enough for agriculture? For solar events like the solstices, absolutely. A few days' warning of the changing seasons was a matter of survival. The lunar cycles, however, are trickier. An 18.6-year pattern does not help you plan next year's harvest. This is where the theory deepens from the practical into the profoundly spiritual. The incredible effort to encode these longer, more subtle cycles hints that their purpose was not merely to mark time, but to connect with it. By building monuments that mirrored the patterns of the heavens, these communities were literally grounding the cosmos. They were creating a sacred intersection where the eternal rhythms of the sky met the temporal world of human life and death. The alignment was a ceremony in stone, a permanent ritual that happened whether people were there to witness it or not. It declared that human order was part of a greater celestial order. The stones were the anchors holding that connection firm across the centuries. Yet for all their celestial precision, the stones have roots that dig just as deep into the earth. A powerful and contrasting theory suggests these monuments were less about watching the heavens and more about connecting with the ground beneath our feet and the generations that came before. Many of these sites are not placed randomly on the landscape but are carefully positioned on significant geological features. They crown hilltops, cluster around powerful springs, or stand at the confluence of rivers. These were places already charged with meaning, where the veil between the mundane and the sacred was thought to be thin. The presence of water is especially telling. Freshwater sources were not just practical necessities for a gathering community. They were often seen as portals to the underworld, places of healing, birth, and spiritual transition. To build a stone circle around or near a sacred spring was to anchor its power permanently. This connection to the earth extends into the realm of the ancestors, and the evidence is often found just beneath the surface. Many stone circles are directly adjacent to or even built over Neolithic burial mounds and chambered tombs. At Salisbury, the massive henge encloses several ancient burial mounds. In the Orkney Islands, the stones of Stenness and the Ring of Brodgar are part of a ritual landscape dotted with tombs. This physical proximity is no coincidence. The stones may have served as permanent, indestructible markers for the ancestral dead, representing the enduring presence of the community's lineage. While the wooden homes of the living decayed and the flesh of the departed returned to the soil, these stone sentinels remained, a timeless claim to the land. They were a declaration that this territory belonged not just to the living, but to all the generations that had come before and all those yet to be born. This idea transforms our understanding of their purpose. Rather than an observatory, a stone circle might have been a temple of the earth, a focal point for ancestor worship. The rituals performed there could have been about communication, not calculation. The stones themselves, especially those with human-like shapes, might have been seen as petrified ancestors or as doorways, portals between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. During ceremonies, perhaps at dawn or on specific feast days, the community would gather among these giants to honor their forebears, to seek their guidance for the coming harvest, or to legitimize their right to the land through a continuous line of descent. The alignment to the solstice sun in this context takes on a different meaning. That piercing beam of light on the darkest day did not just mark a calendar date. It could have been seen as a life-giving force sent by the ancestors to ensure the community's survival, a symbolic rebirth they facilitated from the other side. Some researchers take this connection to the landscape a step further, pointing to the mysterious concept of ley lines. These are hypothetical straight alignments drawn between ancient sites, mountains, and water sources. While the modern idea of energy lines is a 20th century invention, the underlying observation is intriguing. Did Neolithic people perceive certain pathways in the landscape as spiritually significant? A stone circle placed at the intersection of such perceived lines could have been seen as a node of concentrated power, a crossroads of terrestrial forces. Whether or not they believed in literal energy lines, their placement shows an undeniable sensitivity to the topography. They used the natural drama of the land to amplify the impact of their constructions, making the human-made and the natural world inseparable partners in ritual. So, were they temples for watching the sky or shrines for honoring the earth and the ancestors? The stones stubbornly refused to give a single answer, suggesting the truth may be a profound synthesis of both. The silence of the stones may be our greatest modern misconception. While they stand mute today in their prime, these circles were likely anything but quiet. A fascinating new field of research called archaeoacoustics is listening to these monuments in a way we never have before. Scientists are discovering that many stone circles possess remarkable acoustic properties, suggesting they were designed not just as visual spectacles, but as immersive instruments of sound. Take the blue stones at Stonehenge. Modern tests have shown that when struck, these particular rocks produce a clear, resonant metallic ring, a sound unlike any local stone. This unique sonic signature could explain why Neolithic builders went to such extraordinary lengths to bring them from Wales. Perhaps the stones were chosen not only for their color or supposed healing powers, but for their voice. In a world without synthetic music, the ability to make a mountain sing would have been seen as pure magic. Imagine a ceremony at dawn where a priest or shaman strikes specific stones in sequence, creating a melodic, echoing chime that fills the sacred space, signaling the start of a ritual. The sound would have carried for miles across the open plain, calling the community to gather. But the acoustics go beyond individual stones. The very layout of the circles themselves shapes sound in profound ways. Experiments at other sites, like the Rollright stones in England, have demonstrated that the circular arrangement of monoliths acts as a partial sound reflector. Speech or rhythmic drumming from the center of the circle is reflected back by the stones, creating a focused, enveloping soundscape for those inside, while muffling and distorting the noises from the outside world. This creates a powerful auditory boundary, separating the sacred ritual space from the profane. For participants, the effect would have been mesmerizing. Chants and drums would have gained a reverberant, otherworldly quality, their echoes overlapping and building in intensity. This sonic environment could have easily induced altered states of consciousness, especially when combined with rhythmic movement, flickering firelight, and perhaps even psychoactive plants. The circle becomes a resonant chamber, a device for amplifying not just sound but spiritual experience. This theory transforms a static monument into a dynamic performance space. The rituals held there were likely full-body experiences, engaging sight, sound, and physical vibration. The stones were not a passive audience to these ceremonies. They were active participants, shaping and defining the very sound of worship. This shifts our understanding from a site built solely for observation to one engineered for participation. It was a place where the community could literally feel the ritual in their bones, their collective voices amplified and returned to them by the ancient, listening earth. If the stones were instruments, then what sacred music did they play? Perhaps the most honest answer to the great stone mystery is that there is no single answer. Instead of one theory, we are presented with a compelling, centuries-old debate. Let us listen in on a virtual roundtable between three passionate scholars, each championing a different vision of what these monuments truly were. First, we have the archaeoastronomer. She points to the precise solstice alignment at Stonehenge, the lunar standstill encoded at Carnac, the solar doorway at Newgrange. For her, the evidence is written in the sky. These were calendars and observatories, she argues, built by pragmatic farmers who needed to track time for survival. The stones were their unchanging reference points in a cyclical world, a colossal stone almanac that told them when to plant, when to harvest, when to gather. Their primary purpose was scientific, rooted in a deep, empirical observation of the cosmos. Next, the landscape archaeologist raises a counterpoint. He gestures not upward but downward to the earth and to the bones buried within it. He notes how often these circles are built upon older burial sites, near sacred springs, or on powerful geological features. For him, the stones are temples of the earth and the ancestors. They are permanent houses for the spirits of the dead, claiming the land for a lineage that stretches back generations. The solstice light, in this view, is not a calendar marker but a spiritual event, a moment when the veil between worlds grows thin and the ancestors can communicate with or bless the living. The primary purpose was religious, a focus for worship and communion with an unseen realm. Then, the archaeoacoustics researcher chimes in quite literally. She reminds us of the ringing bluestones and the sound-reflecting properties of the circles. She describes how these spaces would have transformed chants and drums into an overwhelming sensory experience, capable of altering consciousness and unifying a crowd through rhythm and vibration. For her, the monument was an instrument. Its purpose was to facilitate powerful, transformative ritual through immersive sound, to create a shared psychological state that bonded the community together in a profound, emotional way. So, who is right? The fascinating truth is they all are. These theories are not mutually exclusive. They are different lenses focusing on different facets of the same magnificent gem. A site could be a precise solar observatory, a temple for ancestral rites, and a resonant ritual chamber all at once. The modern urge to categorize, to separate the church from the calendar, from the concert hall, is a limitation our ancestors did not share. For them, these concepts were woven into a single, seamless tapestry of belief. The sun that marked the solstice was also a god or an ancestor. The sound that unified the crowd also carried prayers to the sky. The stone that marked a lunar extreme also guarded the bones of the forefathers. Their purpose was not singular but symphonic. These sites served calendrical, ceremonial, social, and territorial functions in a way that was inseparable to the people who built them. The stone circle was the heart of their world, where science, spirituality, and society beat as one. The silence of the stones was a vacuum that history abhors. Long before archaeologists with their trowels and theories, storytellers filled that void with epic tales of magic and myth. One of the most famous legends comes from the 12th century, from a writer named Geoffrey of Monmouth. In his History of the Kings of Britain, he tells a fantastic story about the wizard Merlin. According to Geoffrey, a great massacre of British nobles occurred on Salisbury Plain, and King Aurelius wanted to build a lasting memorial. Merlin proposed a solution to bring the giant's ring, a magical circle of stones, from Ireland. He explained that these stones had healing properties and were originally brought from Africa by giants. With his magical arts, Merlin dismantled the circle and had the stones shipped across the sea, where they were re-erected exactly as they stood, creating Stonehenge as a monument to the slain. This medieval fiction, written thousands of years after the stones were raised, reveals how even then their origin seemed superhuman, requiring the intervention of a sorcerer and the strength of ancient giants. Across the Irish Sea, the native myths offered their own otherworldly builders. Irish folklore speaks of the Fomorians, a race of monstrous, chaotic beings who opposed the gods, and the Fir Bolg, earlier inhabitants of the land, often described as holding great strength. These figures were sometimes credited with building the great stone tombs and circles that dotted the landscape, their superhuman power explaining the inexplicable feat of moving mountains. But perhaps the most persistent and mistaken legend of all is the one that links the stones to the Druids. This idea, popularized in the 17th and 18th centuries, is a case of mistaken identity across millennia. The Druids were the learned priestly class of the Celtic Iron Age, a culture that arrived in Britain around 2,500 years ago. The great stone circles, however, were already ancient ruins by that time, having been built and largely abandoned thousands of years earlier during the Neolithic and early Bronze Age. There is no historical or archaeological evidence that Druids built Stonehenge or Avebury. The association likely arose because the Druids were known to worship in sacred groves, natural circles of trees, and later antiquarians, finding the stone circles, assumed they were the Druids' temples. The romantic image of white-robed Druids conducting solstice ceremonies at Stonehenge is powerful and enduring, but it is a later invention, a layer of myth draped over a much older mystery. These stories, from Merlin's magic to the giants of old, are not merely historical errors. They are profound human responses. Faced with a silent, magnificent puzzle, our ancestors did what humans do best: they told a story. They created narratives of wizards and monsters to explain what their own technology and memory could not. The legends show us that the mystery of the stones is not just an archaeological question, but a timeless human one, a testament to our need to find meaning in the monumental, to populate the empty spaces of prehistory with characters and conflicts we can understand. While science has replaced giants with glaciers and wizards with work gangs, that core human urge to explain, to wonder, remains as solid as the stones themselves. The legends of wizards and giants were our first attempts to explain the unexplainable, but the 21st century has given us a new kind of magic, one that lets us see through solid earth. Modern archaeology is no longer just about digging, it is about listening to the ground itself. The most revolutionary tool in this new era is ground-penetrating radar. This technology works like a medical scan for the landscape, sending radar pulses into the soil and reading the echoes that bounce back from buried features. It reveals hidden structures without ever breaking the surface, painting a digital picture of a lost world beneath our feet. And what it has shown us at the world's most famous stone circle has utterly rewritten its story. The Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes Project, a collaboration between universities in the United Kingdom and Austria, spent years scanning the fields around the monument. Their findings were staggering. They discovered that Stonehenge was not a solitary masterpiece in an empty plain, but the glittering centerpiece of a vast, hidden ritual complex. The radar revealed a sprawling network of previously unknown monuments, including more than 15 large Neolithic structures and hundreds of burial mounds. But the most jaw-dropping discovery was a series of at least 20 massive, deep shafts, arranged in a circle nearly 2 miles in diameter, centered on the Durrington Walls Henge, the great settlement site just a couple of miles from Stonehenge itself. These shafts, each over 30 feet across and 15 feet deep, form a colossal cosmic boundary, a giant circle marking a sacred precinct on a scale never before imagined. This was not a simple enclosure, it was a cosmological statement carved into the chalk, defining a domain of the gods and the ancestors. It tells us that the entire landscape was systematically organized, zoned for sacred activity, with different areas for the living, the dead, and the celestial observances. The stones we see today are merely the surviving architecture of a belief system that shaped every inch of the territory. This pattern of hidden complexity is repeating at other iconic sites. At the Great Stone Rose of Carnac in France, similar geophysical surveys have detected the remains of a gigantic enclosed structure, possibly a precursor to the alignments, buried just beneath the soil. In the Boyne Valley of Ireland, home to Newgrange, radar has mapped an intricate web of smaller monuments and pathways connecting the great tombs, suggesting a busy ritual landscape where processions moved from one sacred node to another. Every time this technology is deployed, it peels back another layer of the mystery, revealing that the visible monuments are just the tip of a monumental iceberg. What we stand and admire are the final, enduring sentences of a story, while the ground beneath holds entire preceding chapters, filled with wooden temples, processional avenues, and ritual pits that have long since vanished from view. This changes everything. It means the solitude we feel at a stone circle today is an illusion. These were not quiet, lonely places, but the bustling hubs of a ritual metropolis, alive with temporary structures, crowds of people, and constant ceremonial activity across generations. The new discoveries are a humbling reminder that for all our theories, we have only just begun to read the full text of the Neolithic world. The mystery is not a closed book on a shelf, but an active excavation, with new pages being written by the faint echoes of radar waves finding lost patterns in the dark earth. The radar reveals the landscape, but the bones tell the stories of the people. Recent scientific breakthroughs are finally giving a voice to the individuals who built and used these monuments, allowing us to meet them not as a faceless culture, but as a network of families, travelers, and pilgrims. The most powerful tool in this new investigation comes from genetics. By extracting ancient DNA from skeletal remains found in tombs across Europe, scientists have mapped a grand migration. They have traced the journey of Neolithic farmers who, beginning around 9,000 years ago, spread out from Anatolia in modern-day Turkey, bringing their agricultural way of life with them. This was not a simple replacement. The DNA tells a complex story of interaction between these incoming farmers and the indigenous hunter-gatherer populations who had lived in Europe for millennia. Over generations, these groups mixed, traded, and likely clashed, creating the unique genetic tapestry of the communities that would later raise the standing stones. This genetic evidence shatters the old idea of isolated, primitive tribes. It reveals a dynamic, interconnected Neolithic world where ideas, goods, and people moved across vast distances. But to understand an individual's life, we look not to their genes, but to the chemical signatures locked in their bones and teeth, a science called isotopic analysis. Our bodies are built from the food and water we consume, and these elements carry a geographic fingerprint. The ratio of different strontium and oxygen isotopes in your tooth enamel, which forms in childhood, reflects the geology and climate of where you grew up. By analyzing these isotopes in Neolithic remains, archaeologists can perform a kind of prehistoric forensics, determining where a person spent their early years. The results from sites like Stonehenge are astonishing. While many individuals buried there show a local signature matching the chalk geology of the Salisbury Plain, others tell a very different story. Some of the remains, particularly those of people buried during the monument's early phases, carry isotopic signatures that match the ancient rocks of Western Britain, specifically Wales. This is the same region as the Preseli Hills, the source of the bluestones. The implication is profound. It means that people from Wales were not only involved in the early construction of Stonehenge, but some of them actually traveled the 150 miles to live, work, and eventually die there. They were buried within the sacred landscape they helped create. This transforms our understanding of these sites. Stonehenge was not just a local temple for nearby villages. It was a destination. The movement of stones from Wales now appears mirrored by a movement of people. This suggests pilgrimage, a journey to a center of spiritual power. Perhaps families or entire clans undertook seasonal migrations, traveling to the plain for major festivals, to contribute labor, and to inter their honored dead in the shadow of the stones. The isotopic evidence paints a picture of a surprisingly mobile society, bound together not by rigid borders, but by shared ceremonial centers. These monuments were the glue of a far-flung cultural network. People from different regions with potentially different ancestries blending farmer and hunter-gatherer gathered at these hubs. They exchanged not only goods and genes, but also knowledge, stories, and a collective identity forged under the solstice sun. The stones, therefore, were more than calendars or temples. They were the anchors of a social universe, drawing people across the landscape toward a common, sacred purpose. Could we, with all our modern knowledge, actually build a stone circle today using only the tools of the Neolithic? This is not just a hypothetical question. Over the past few decades, several ambitious experiments have tried to do exactly that, stripping away our machinery to confront the raw challenge our ancestors faced. In the 1990s, a team for a BBC documentary attempted to move a single concrete replica of a Stonehenge bluestone weighing just under 4 tons. They constructed a massive wooden sledge and laid it on a track of greased wooden rails. With a team of around 130 volunteers pulling on long ropes, they managed to drag the stone across level ground. The effort was immense, the progress achingly slow, and it required constant coordination through shouted chants to keep everyone pulling in unison. It was a powerful lesson in the sheer physical demand, but it was only the first step in a much longer, more complex process. More comprehensive efforts, like those filmed for Nova documentaries, have taken the experiment further. They have quarried stone using only fire setting and water, patiently cracking bedrock with heat and cold. They have shaped multi-ton monoliths with stone mauls, a process that takes weeks of relentless, noisy pounding to chip away even a few inches. The true test, however, is the raising. Using a frame of timber and a system of ropes and levers, teams have successfully lifted stones into prepared holes. The moment a multi-ton slab swings upright and thuds into its socket is one of pure, triumphant exhilaration, followed immediately by the meticulous work of packing the base with stones and earth to hold it forever. These projects reveal a cascade of practical insights. First, the manpower required is staggering. To move a 25-ton sarsen like those at Stonehenge, experts estimate you would need a well-organized crew of at least 200 people, not just for the pull, but for the constant work of moving rollers, applying grease, and steering the sledge. This was not a weekend project for a village. It was a seasonal, communal undertaking that defined a generation. Second, the experiments highlight the critical role of simple, brilliant engineering. The Neolithic toolkit was minimal, but its application was masterful. The use of a sled on rollers reduces ground friction dramatically. The frame acts as a giant lever, multiplying human force. The mortise and tenon joints lock stones together with elegant stability. These were not primitive people guessing. They were engineers applying proven physics, their knowledge hard-won through generations of trial and error. Perhaps the most profound lesson is about social organization. Moving a stone is a symphony, not a solo. It requires leaders to plan and direct, craft specialists to make and maintain the tools, and a committed community willing to contribute their labor for a goal that they themselves might never see finished. The modern volunteers often speak of the powerful bond that forms during the work, a shared struggle that creates a deep sense of collective purpose. This intangible social glue, the ability to unite hundreds of people toward a single, distant vision, may have been the Neolithic world's greatest technology of all. These experiments strip away the mystery of magic and replace it with something even more impressive, the clear evidence of human ingenuity, patience, and extraordinary cooperation. They force us to see the stones not as alien artifacts, but as the direct, tangible products of minds and muscles not so different from our own. The elegant theories of celestial calendars and earth temples, however, face a stubborn challenge from the stones themselves. For every monument with a perfect solstice alignment, there are dozens more whose patterns seem to whisper a different, more cryptic language. Consider the rollright stones in England. This ancient circle of weathered limestone sits on a high ridge, yet its stones are irregularly spaced and of wildly different heights. Despite extensive study, no consistent astronomical alignment has been proven here. The horizon is partially obscured by rolling hills, and the circle itself feels less like a precise instrument and more like a gathering of distinct individuals frozen in conversation. Then there are the countless smaller circles scattered across the British Isles and Brittany, often just a few stones remaining, placed in secluded valleys or on slopes with no clear view of sunrise or sunset on key dates. Their locations seem chosen for intimacy, not celestial spectacle. Perhaps the most famous anomaly is the Great Circle at Stanton, Drew in England, the second largest after Avebury. Here, 3 stone circles and a group of standing stones called the Cove are arranged in a complex pattern. While some alignments to lunar extremes have been proposed, they are not as clear or dramatic as at Carnac or Stonehenge. The site's most striking feature is its location in a river valley surrounded by higher ground. This is not the place for grand horizon astronomy. Instead, folklore insists the stones are a wedding party petrified for dancing on the Sabbath, a story that speaks to the site's social rather than celestial character in the local imagination. This points to a crucial truth. We must be wary of forcing every ring of stones into the same interpretive box. The drive to find universal patterns can blind us to local meaning. What if, for some communities, the primary purpose was not to track the sky but to do something far more human? To gather, to trade, to settle disputes, or to forge alliances through shared ritual? A circle with no solar alignment might have been a neutral meeting ground for different clans, its form representing equality and unity. A monument in a hidden valley could have been an initiation site, a place of secrecy and transformation shielded from the outside world. The very randomness we perceive might encode a social logic we have lost, a system of land tenure, ancestral storytelling, or clan identity that made perfect sense to the people who built it. Environmental factors also played a role we can underestimate. The perfect hilltop with a panoramic view might have already been claimed by an older, rival group, or it might have been devoid of the necessary spiritual presence found in a grove or near a particular spring. The stones themselves sometimes refuse categorization entirely. Look at the complex at Cairnpapel Hill in Scotland. It began as a ceremonial site with cremations and a stone circle. Later, it was transformed into a henge monument and later still covered by a massive Bronze Age cairn. This is not a single-purpose observatory or temple, but a palimpsest, a sacred hill reused and reimagined over millennia for different reasons by different peoples. Its meaning evolved layer upon layer. This is the ultimate caution against one-size-fits-all explanations. The Neolithic period lasted for over 2,000 years, and beliefs, needs, and architectural fashions changed across that vast span of time. A circle built at the dawn of the era may have served a completely different function than one built 1,000 years later, even if they look similar to our eyes. These anomalies are not failures of the theory, but invitations to think more broadly. They remind us that the past is not a neat puzzle waiting for a single key. It is a mosaic of countless local decisions, a tapestry woven from practical needs, spiritual beliefs, social structures, and the sheer, stubborn particularity of place. The silent stones that defy our clearest patterns may be guarding the most intimate secrets of all, the stories of communities whose priorities were their own, and whose reasons for raising giants from the earth were as unique as the landscapes they called home. The stones endure, but so much of their world has simply vanished. Our picture of the Neolithic is built on what survives: the unyielding rock, the flint tools, the bones in the earth. Yet these are merely the skeleton of a vanished culture. The flesh and blood, the vibrant life that animated these places, has turned to dust. Consider all the materials that have decayed without a trace. The great timber circles that often preceded the stone ones, like the massive posts at the sanctuary near Avebury, have left only dark stains in the soil. The miles of ropes woven from plant fibers or leather that hauled the monoliths, the wooden sledges and rollers that groaned under their weight, the vibrant paints that might have adorned the stones with spirals, animals, or celestial symbols, transforming gray rock into a canvas of sacred art. The clothing people wore, the feathered headdresses, the leather bags, the woven baskets that held offerings, all of it, every stitch and strand, has been reclaimed by the earth. We are left with the monumental architecture, but we have lost the stage dressing, the props, and most of the costumes from the performance. Even more profound is the loss of the intangible. We can measure the solstice alignment, but we cannot hear the specific chant that was sung as the sun broke the horizon. We can map the processional avenue, but we do not know the words of the prayer spoken at each turning. The stories that gave meaning to the stones, the epic myths of gods and heroes that explained why this particular hill or that specific stone was sacred, those narratives died with the last teller who held them in memory. What was the name they gave to the tallest sarsen at Stonehenge? What taboo or blessing was associated with touching the blue stones? What promise did the ancestors make from within their chambered tombs? These are the whispers that have faded into a silence even the most sensitive radar cannot detect. This forces a humbling recognition about the limits of our investigation. We approach these mysteries with a scientific, analytical mindset. We seek data, patterns, and logical explanations. We want to know the how and the why in terms of engineering, astronomy, and social organization. But the Neolithic worldview likely made no such clean divisions. For the builders, the myth was not separate from the landscape, it was the landscape. A hill was not just a hill, it was the body of a goddess. A spring was not just water, it was the tears of an ancestor. The community was not just a group of people living together, it was an extension of that living, sacred land. Their truth was not held in a single theory, but in a holistic, experiential understanding where every element, from the path of the moon to the taste of the harvest, was part of a single, interconnected story. Our modern tools can reconstruct the scaffolding of their lives, but they cannot easily recapture the feeling, the raw spiritual certainty, that would compel a person to spend a lifetime hauling stones for a monument they would never see finished. This is not a failure of archaeology, but a definition of its purpose. The gaps in our knowledge are as instructive as the facts. They remind us that history is not a puzzle to be completely solved, but a conversation across time. We bring our questions to the stones, and they answer with the evidence they have kept. The silence about the songs is itself a statement, telling us that some of the most important parts of human experience, faith, emotion, and oral tradition, are inherently fragile. They live in the moment, in the community, and in the breath, not in the stone. So we are left with a profound respect for both what we can know and what we must simply wonder about. The enduring mystery is not a problem to be fixed, but a gift. It invites us to balance our brilliant deductions with a respectful humility, to acknowledge that the full truth of those dawn ceremonies at Stonehenge or those moonlit processions at Carnac is a secret the stones will keep forever, locked not in their form, but in the lost echoes of the voices that once called them sacred. The very forces that preserved these stones for millennia are now shifting against them. Our modern world presents a new and complex set of threats to these ancient sentinels, challenges their builders could never have foreseen. Perhaps the most visible pressure comes from our own fascination, the sheer weight of human footsteps. At a site like Stonehenge, over 1 million visitors a year once walked directly among the stones, a constant procession that compacted the earth, threatened the stability of the monuments, and left an invisible toll of erosion. In response, authorities made a difficult but necessary decision. They moved the visitor center over a mile away and now require guests to view the circle from a surrounding path. While this protects the archaeology, it fundamentally changes the experience, creating a respectful but undeniable distance between the modern seeker and the ancient mystery. This is the central, heartbreaking dilemma of preservation. How do you protect something from the very love and curiosity it inspires? For every world-famous circle with managed walkways and timed tickets, there are hundreds of lesser-known sites quietly suffering. In remote fields, stones are threatened by expanding agriculture, their bases nicked by plows or their settings disturbed by deep-rooted crops. Unfenced sites on private land can be vulnerable to casual vandalism, from spray paint to attempts to topple stones, acts of disregard that erase in a moment what took generations to build. The slow creep of natural erosion is being dramatically accelerated by a new global force, climate change. Increased winter rainfall in places like the British Isles and Brittany is saturating the ground. For a massive stone standing in a socket packed with smaller rocks, this is a critical danger. The saturated soil expands and contracts with freezing and thawing, slowly but relentlessly working the stone loose in its foundation. More frequent and severe storms bring stronger winds that can buffet these giant slabs, while rising sea levels and coastal erosion threaten sites like those in Orkney and Brittany, where the land itself is being eaten away. The stones that have withstood 5,000 years of weather now face a climate their builders did not design them for. This multifaceted crisis has sparked a global effort by heritage organizations, archaeologists, and local communities. Their work is a delicate balancing act between access and conservation. At some sites, this involves high-tech monitoring, using lasers and drones to create millimeter-perfect digital records of every stone, tracking the slightest movement over time. At others, it is humble, hands-on labor, repacking eroded stone sockets with authentic materials, or carefully controlling vegetation whose roots can pry apart ancient masonry. Public education is just as vital, teaching visitors that touching the stones transfers oils from skin that accelerate weathering, or that walking off paths destroys fragile archaeological layers unseen beneath the grass. The goal is not to lock these places away, but to steward them thoughtfully. It is about ensuring that the silence of the stones is not replaced by the final silence of loss, that 5,000 years from now, on a winter solstice morning, sunlight will still strike that same ancient altar, and future generations will still stand in the wind wondering. The human urge to raise stones in a circle never truly ended. That ancient form, born in the Neolithic dawn, still calls to us today, a powerful shape that artists, visionaries, and mourners have reclaimed for the modern age. Across the world, new stone circles rise, built not with antler picks but with cranes, yet often fueled by the same timeless desires for meaning, memory, and connection to something larger than ourselves. In the rolling hills of Scotland, the Circle of Life stands in a quiet forest. Built in 2003 by a local community, its 12 granite stones, each from a different region of the country, are arranged to align with the solstice sun. It is a place for quiet reflection, a modern sanctuary consciously echoing the ancient patterns of Callanish and Stenness, proving that the need for a sacred, calendrical space in nature is not a relic but a living tradition. Perhaps the most famous and controversial modern example was the Georgia Guidestones, erected in 1980 in the United States. This granite monument, often called America's Stonehenge, featured 10 guidelines for humanity carved in 8 languages, with an aperture that channeled sunlight to mark the solstices and equinoxes. Unlike ancient circles whose purpose is debated, the Guidestones proclaimed a clear, if enigmatic, modern message about rebuilding civilization. Their partial destruction in recent years only added another layer of mystery to their story, a reminder that modern stones can become as contested and symbolic as their ancient predecessors. Beyond deliberate monuments, the aesthetic power of the circle has deeply influenced the land art movement. Artists like Richard Long and Andy Goldsworthy create temporary or semi-permanent stone circles and spirals in remote landscapes, using the ancient form to explore our relationship with time, nature, and impermanence. Their work is a direct conversation with the past, using the same vocabulary of stone and placement to ask contemporary questions. This fascination extends beyond creation to pilgrimage. The New Age and modern pagan movements have actively adopted ancient stone circles as living temples. At every summer solstice, thousands gather at Stonehenge, not as archaeologists but as participants in a continuous spiritual tradition. They may not share the exact beliefs of the Neolithic builders, but they feel the same gravitational pull of the place, seeking connection, healing, and a direct experience of celestial power. For them, the stones are not cold relics in a museum case, but active portals. This practice, while sometimes challenging for preservationists, highlights a profound truth: these sites never stopped being sacred. Their original ritual purpose may be lost, but their capacity to inspire ritual is vibrantly alive. The modern world, for all its noise and speed, still craves the silent, solid certainty of stone aligned with the stars. We look at these ancient rings and see not just a puzzle to be solved, but a mirror. They reflect our own enduring search for order in the cosmos, for a permanent mark against the fleeting years, and for a place to stand together and look up in shared wonder. The circle, it seems, remains unbroken. Perhaps the most honest answer is that the stones were never meant to serve just one purpose. After walking through the evidence, from the solstice sunbeams to the echoing acoustics, from the ancestral bones to the distant quarries, a singular, elegant solution emerges. The most compelling theory is not a choice between calendar, temple, or symbol, but a recognition that they were all these things at once, seamlessly woven into the fabric of Neolithic life. These were multifunctional epicenters, the beating hearts of their world. First and foremost, they were a communal calendar carved from the landscape itself. For a society that lived and died by the seasons, knowing precisely when to plant, when to harvest, and when to gather the clans was a matter of survival. The alignments to the solstice sun and the complex lunar cycles provided that fixed, unshakable schedule. But this was no dry, scientific almanac. The moment the sun crested the heel stone or the moon rolled down the avenue at Carnac was a spiritual event, a direct communication from the cosmos. This transforms the calendar into a temple. The ritual was built into the architecture. The community didn't just observe the date, they experienced it, gathering within the stone ring as the celestial event unfolded, using sound and ceremony to connect with the forces that governed their lives. And who were they connecting with? The ancestors, whose physical remains often lay in tombs just a stone's throw away. The stones served as a permanent conduit between the living, the dead, and the celestial powers, a place where all three realms could intersect during these potent, calendrically significant moments. Finally, and perhaps most fundamentally, the monument was an enduring symbol. It was a declaration of identity, unity, and power. The sheer effort of construction proved a community's cohesion and strength to neighbors and rivals. The stones claimed the land not just for the living, but for all the generations that had come before and all those yet to be born. They were a promise of permanence in a changing world. So, were they observatories? Absolutely. Were they temples? Without a doubt. Were they territorial markers and social glue? Certainly. Trying to separate these functions is a modern impulse, a desire to categorize that the Neolithic mind likely did not share. For them, the agricultural cycle, the ancestral spirits, the movements of the gods in the sky, and the community's right to the land were all parts of one inseparable whole. The true purpose of the standing stones was to be the physical anchor for that entire worldview. They were the fixed point around which time, belief, society, and territory all revolved, a silent, stable center in a spinning world. So far, you have been an observer of this ancient mystery. Now, let us become investigators together. We are going to examine a specific, lesser-known stone circle as if it were a fresh case file, and I want you to piece together its purpose. Our subject is the Rollright Stones, nestled in the rolling Cotswold Hills of England. This is not a single monument, but a complex of three distinct structures built over centuries. First, there is the King's Men, a circle of about 77 weathered limestone stones, though only a handful remain upright today. They are irregular, of different heights, and spaced unevenly in a rough ring about 100 feet across. About 80 yards to the east stands the King's Stone, a single, jagged monolith leaning at a dramatic angle, and 200 yards away lies the Whispering Knights, a collapsed burial chamber or dolmen, its massive capstone slid from its supports. The data presents puzzles. The circle sits on a high ridge, but its view of the horizon is broken by surrounding hills. Archaeoastronomers have proposed various alignments, perhaps to the moon's northernmost rising or to certain stars, but none are as clear and undeniable as the solstice alignments at Stonehenge. The local folklore is rich and evocative. Legend says the stones are a king and his army petrified by a witch. The king became the Lone King's Stone, his knights the Whispering Knight's dolmen, and his men the circle itself. The witch, it is said, still haunts the site. So, what is your theory? Look at the evidence. The three separate elements suggest different functions used together. The Whispering Knight's is clearly a tomb, a house for the dead. The King's Stone, solitary and prominent, could be a territorial marker or a memorial. But the main circle, the King's Men, with its irregular, almost conversational arrangement, what was it for? Was it a tribal meeting ground, a neutral court where disputes were settled, a place for seasonal trade fairs and social gatherings? Could its seemingly random layout actually encode a social hierarchy with specific stones representing different clans or families? Perhaps its purpose was more intimate, a secluded place for initiations or rites of passage, hidden from the wider world. Or, despite the obscured horizon, did its builders track a more subtle celestial event we have yet to decipher? I want you to pause here, think like an archaeologist with this case file. Consider the location, the layout, the folklore, and the proximity to a tomb. What story does this place tell you? Jump into the comments and share your theory. Was it a cemetery complex, a social hub, a lost observatory, or something else entirely? This is your turn to decode the silence. The stones have held their secrets for over 5,000 years, and they will likely hold them for 5,000 more. Our journey began in the quiet dawn of the Neolithic Revolution, when the first farmers settled the land and discovered the power of community. From that simple, profound shift emerged the ambition to build on a scale the world had never seen. We have walked among the giants, from the engineered precision of Stonehenge, where the solstice sun still finds its mark, to the overwhelming stone armies of Carnac, marching in silent rows across the French countryside. We have stood beneath the slender pillars of Carnac, tracing the moon's long dance across the Scottish sky. We have listened to the echoes of acoustics and followed the isotopic trails of ancient pilgrims. We have weighed the theories of calendars, temples, and territorial claims, only to find that the most satisfying answer is a tapestry woven from all these threads. The definitive answer may forever elude us, and perhaps that is the point. The true power of these monuments lies not in a solution we can neatly file away, but in the endless process of questioning they inspire. They are not closed books, but open invitations. Every new radar scan, every DNA analysis, every thoughtful visitor who stands in the wind and wonders, adds another line to an ongoing conversation with the deep past. These silent sentinels are far more than ancient ruins. They are a mirror held up to humanity itself, reflecting our ingenuity to move mountains with nothing but rope and will, our spirituality that sought the divine in the turn of the seasons, and our eternal, aching desire to make a mark that outlasts the fleeting span of a single life. They are a testament written not in ink but in earth and sky. So the next time you see an image of a stone circle silhouetted against a setting sun, remember you are not looking at a mystery to be solved, but at a monument to the very human need to reach for something permanent, to connect, to understand, and to wonder. If this journey through the age of stone has sparked your curiosity, let us know in the comments below which theory for their purpose you find most convincing. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to continue exploring history's greatest puzzles with us.